"He's just a coworker," she said when I asked about the late nights, and those 5 words would echo in my mind for months afterward. A lie so perfectly delivered that I almost believed it. Almost convinced myself that my growing suspicions were just paranoia. But her phone would eventually betray every deception she'd carefully constructed, revealing a web of lies that would destroy everything I thought I knew about our marriage. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. My name is Marcus Chen, I'm 43 years old, and I own a successful architectural firm in downtown Seattle. The kind of business that builds custom homes for tech executives and designs office complexes that reshape city skylines. Work that had given my wife Rebecca and me a comfortable life in our Bellevue home overlooking Lake Washington, complete with the 2-car garage, the landscaped yard, and the kind of financial security that lets you plan European vacations without checking your bank account first. Rebecca, 41, worked as a senior marketing director for a growing software company, brilliant at her job, ambitious in ways I'd always admired. The kind of woman who could command a boardroom and then come home to help our 10-year-old son Jake with his science projects. And for 12 years of marriage, I'd believed we were the couple other people envied. The ones who'd figured out how to balance demanding careers with genuine partnership, who still held hands during movie nights and sent each other flirty texts during boring meetings. Our life had a rhythm that felt sustainable, predictable in the best way. Morning coffee together before Jake woke up, family dinners at least 4 nights a week, weekend adventures hiking the Cascades or exploring Pike Place Market, annual trips to Hawaii where we'd rediscover each other away from work pressures, and a social circle of couples who'd known us since our early 30s, back when we were still figuring out who we wanted to become. I trusted Rebecca completely, the kind of bone-deep trust that comes from watching someone navigate life's challenges with integrity, from seeing how she treated our son, our friends, the barista at our regular coffee shop, and I'd never had reason to question that trust until the subtle changes started creeping in like shadows at dusk, so gradual I almost didn't notice them. The first sign was her phone habits changing. The device that used to sit casually on kitchen counters suddenly became something she carried everywhere, taking it to the bathroom, keeping it face down during dinner, the soft buzz of notifications making her glance at the screen with an expression I'd never seen before, something between anticipation and secrecy that made my stomach tighten in ways I couldn't explain. Then came the late nights at the office, which weren't unusual in her industry, but the frequency increased from once a week to 3 times, then 4, always with explanations that sounded reasonable. Client presentations, strategy sessions, emergency meetings with the executive team, and when I'd offer to bring her dinner or suggest she work from home, she'd decline with reasons that felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced them in her car before walking through our front door. The name David started appearing in her work stories around this time, always in professional contexts. David had great insights during the marketing review. David was leading the new product launch. David suggested this brilliant campaign strategy, and I filed his name away as just another colleague until I realized how often she mentioned him, how her voice carried a different energy when she talked about their collaborations. A spark that reminded me of how she used to talk about me in our early dating days. Rebecca began paying more attention to her appearance, spending extra time getting ready for work, buying new clothes that were more form-fitting than her usual professional wardrobe, trying different perfumes and asking my opinion in ways that felt like she was testing responses rather than seeking genuine feedback. And when I complimented her, she'd smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Like she was performing appreciation rather than feeling it. Our intimacy started shifting too, not disappearing entirely but becoming less frequent, more scheduled, lacking the spontaneous passion that had always been a cornerstone of our relationship. And when I tried to initiate conversations about it, she'd blame work stress, the pressure of her new responsibilities, the exhaustion that came with managing larger budgets and bigger teams. I wanted to believe these explanations because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. The possibility that the woman I'd built my life around was becoming a stranger, that the partnership I'd counted on was slowly dissolving, while I remained obliviously optimistic about our future together. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in October when Rebecca called at 6:30 to say she'd be late again. Another client emergency that required her personal attention, but something in her voice sounded different, distracted. Like she was reading from a script while her attention was elsewhere. And when I asked which client, there was a pause just long enough to make me notice before she gave me a name I'd never heard her mention before. I spent that evening helping Jake with homework, making dinner for 2 instead of 3, watching my son ask why mommy was always working late. His innocent question hitting me like a physical blow because I realized I'd been asking myself the same thing but hadn't wanted to face the implications of the answer. When Rebecca came home at 11:15, her explanation tumbling out before I could ask questions, I noticed things I'd been unconsciously cataloging for weeks. Her lipstick was gone, but her lips looked like they'd been recently kissed. Her hair was slightly mussed despite her claims of sitting in conference rooms. And there was a faint scent of cologne that definitely wasn't mine clinging to her blazer, details that individually could be explained away, but together painted a picture I desperately didn't want to see. That weekend, I suggested we spend Saturday together as a family, maybe drive to the mountains or explore one of Seattle's neighborhoods we'd never visited. But Rebecca claimed she needed to catch up on work. Sitting in our home office with the door closed, and when I brought her coffee, I glimpsed her phone screen for just a second before she quickly flipped it over. But that second was enough to see a text conversation that definitely wasn't about marketing strategies or client presentations. Sunday night, after Jake was asleep, I finally confronted the growing distance between us, asking Rebecca directly if everything was okay with our marriage, if there was something she needed to tell me. And she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between guilt and defiance, before launching into a speech about how demanding her job had become, how I didn't understand the pressure she was under, how she needed my support rather than my suspicion. "You're being paranoid, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying an edge of irritation that felt like a warning. "David is just a colleague, nothing more. We're working on the biggest campaign launch in company history, and I need to be available when the team needs me. I can't believe you're making this about us when I'm trying to advance my career." The way she said David's name with that same careful emphasis I'd been noticing for weeks made something click into place in my mind, a puzzle piece I'd been avoiding that suddenly fit perfectly into the growing picture of deception I'd been unconsciously assembling. I backed down that night, apologized for questioning her, told her I supported her ambitions and trusted her judgment. But inside I knew something fundamental had shifted, that the woman I'd married wouldn't have deflected my concerns so defensively, wouldn't have made me feel guilty for noticing changes in our relationship, wouldn't have turned my legitimate worries into attacks on her character. As I lay in bed that night, listening to Rebecca's breathing beside me, her phone charging on the nightstand just inches away, I realized that device contained answers to every question I'd been afraid to ask. Every suspicion I'd been trying to suppress, every doubt that had been growing like a cancer in the back of my mind, and I knew that soon, very soon, I was going to have to decide whether I wanted to keep living in comfortable ignorance or face whatever truth was waiting in those text messages, those call logs, those photos and emails that would either restore my faith in our marriage or destroy everything I'd believed about the woman sleeping next to me. The opportunity came 2 days later when Rebecca left her phone charging on the kitchen counter while she rushed upstairs for a quick shower before another late meeting. And as I stood there staring at that device, I realized this was the moment of truth I'd been both dreading and desperately needing. The chance to either confirm my worst fears or restore my faith in the woman I'd married 12 years ago. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The phone sat there innocently, its black screen reflecting my face, and I found myself frozen for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, my hand trembling as I reached for it, knowing that whatever I discovered would fundamentally change everything between us forever, but unable to stop myself from seeking the truth that had been eating away at my sanity for months. I picked up the device, my heart hammering against my ribs, and swiped up to reveal the lock screen, but when I tried her usual passcode combinations, our anniversary, Jake's birthday, her own birthday, nothing worked. Until I remembered something from a few weeks earlier when she'd been showing Jake a game and laughed when he got something wrong, saying, "No silly, it's daddy's number backward." And with shaking fingers, I entered my own cell phone number in reverse. 7014, and the phone unlocked like a door opening into a nightmare I wasn't prepared to face. The first thing I saw was a text thread pinned at the top with a single letter D and a preview that made my blood freeze. "Can't wait to see you tonight, beautiful, same place as last time." And I knew with absolute certainty that my marriage was over, but I forced myself to tap the thread and scroll through what would become the most devastating reading of my entire life. The messages painted a picture of a full-blown affair that had been going on for 4 months, starting with innocent work collaboration that quickly escalated to flirtation, then emotional intimacy, then explicit planning of hotel meetings. Intimate photos exchanged during my business trips, and declarations of love sent while I was sleeping beside her, trusting and completely oblivious to the betrayal happening inches away from me. Rebecca described me as predictable and boring, telling David how she'd been unhappy for years but stayed because of Jake and financial security, how meeting him had shown her what real passion felt like, how she was planning to ask for a divorce after the holidays so our son wouldn't associate Christmas with family destruction. Her words clinical and calculating in ways that made me feel like I was reading about a stranger's life rather than my own. David's responses were equally devastating, calling me the obstacle and joking about how easy it was to fool suburban husbands who were too comfortable to notice their wives slipping away. suggesting they needed to be more careful because I was starting to ask questions, Rebecca assuring him that I was too trusting and predictable to ever actually investigate, that she could manage me indefinitely while they figured out their long-term plans. The photos were the worst part, intimate images Rebecca had sent during work hours, pictures taken in our bedroom while I was at the office, her wearing lingerie I'd bought for our anniversary but had never seen her wear. The background clearly showing our home, our bed, our life being used as a stage for her affair. The violation so complete and personal that I had to sit down on our kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, trying not to vomit while the shower continued running upstairs. I found hotel receipts forwarded to her email, charges to credit cards I didn't monitor, restaurant bills for two people during times when she claimed to be working late alone. A comprehensive financial trail that showed how thoroughly she'd been living a double life, using our shared resources to fund her affair while maintaining the pretense of being a devoted wife and mother. The calculations so cold and deliberate that I wondered if I'd ever really known the woman I'd married. My architect's training kicked in automatically, the same methodical approach I used for complex projects, and I began systematically documenting everything. Screenshots of every damning message, photos of hotel reservations, call logs showing late-night conversations while I slept beside her, forwarding key evidence to a secure email account she'd never suspect, building an unassailable case with the precision I'd use for any critical design project. The water stopped running upstairs, Rebecca's voice calling down that she'd forgotten her phone, asking if I could bring it up, and I quickly closed all the apps, placed the device exactly where I'd found it, climbed the stairs with legs that felt like they might collapse, and handed her the phone with a smile that felt like wearing a mask, watching her check the screen immediately for David's message. Seeing her face light up with an expression of joy she hadn't shown me in months, maybe years. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing something different in my expression, and I realized I was staring at her like she was a stranger, which in many ways she was. This woman who'd been sharing our bed while planning to leave me, who'd been kissing me goodbye each morning before spending her days with another man, who'd been helping Jake with homework while texting about hotel reservations and secret meetings. "Just tired," I managed to say, the lie coming easier than I expected, and she nodded, already distracted by her phone, probably reading David's message about their plans for that evening. Another late night at the office that I now knew was code for another betrayal, another few hours of my life stolen by their deception. That evening played out exactly as I'd predicted, Rebecca announcing at dinner that she had to work late again, apologizing to Jake with what I now recognized as practiced regret, kissing my cheek with lips that would soon be kissing another man, the routine so familiar and yet completely transformed by my new knowledge, every gesture now revealed as performance. Every expression of love exposed as manipulation designed to keep me compliant while she pursued her real relationship. After she left for her meeting, I sat in my home office with printed screenshots spread across my desk like evidence in a criminal case, and I realized that the trusting, naive husband who'd hoped for innocent explanations had died that afternoon, replaced by someone colder, more calculating, someone who understood that if Rebecca wanted to destroy our marriage, I'd make sure she did it in a way that protected everything I'd built and ensured she faced real consequences for the systematic betrayal she'd been conducting right under my nose for months. The first decision I made that night, sitting alone in my office with Rebecca's betrayal printed out in black and white, was that I wouldn't confront her emotionally, wouldn't explode or beg or ask why him, why us. All the questions that desperate husbands ask in the heat of discovery. Instead, if she wanted to turn our marriage into a calculated project of deception, then I would become even more calculated, treating this like any high-stakes architectural project. Gather comprehensive data, secure the foundation, and execute a plan so precise that by the time she realized what was happening, her options would be limited to watching everything collapse around her. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. My architect's training had taught me that emotional decisions create structural failures, and I couldn't afford any weakness in what was about to become the most important project of my life. So the following morning, after dropping Jake at school and maintaining my facade of normalcy, I drove downtown to meet with Laura Delgado, a divorce attorney whose reputation for handling high-asset cases with surgical precision had made her the go-to choice for Seattle's business elite when their marriages imploded. Laura's office occupied the 32nd floor of a glass tower overlooking Elliott Bay, all clean lines and understated luxury, the kind of space designed to make clients feel both intimidated and reassured. And when she emerged from her inner office, mid-50s, sharp eyes behind designer glasses, navy suit that screamed competence, I knew I'd found the right advocate for what was about to unfold. "Tell me everything," she said, activating a digital recorder with practiced efficiency, and I laid out the evidence methodically. Rebecca's changed behavior, the phone discovery, David's messages, the hotel receipts, the systematic lies. Watching Laura's expression remain professionally neutral even as she made notes that would eventually become the blueprint for Rebecca's legal destruction. When I finished, Laura leaned back in her leather chair and delivered her assessment with the kind of clarity that made her worth every penny of her substantial retainer. Mr. Chen, this isn't just adultery, it's premeditated marital fraud conducted with community property assets. And in Washington state, while we're technically no fault for divorce, judges absolutely consider conduct when dividing assets and determining custody arrangements, especially when children are involved. She outlined the strategy with military precision. First, hire a licensed private investigator to gather court-admissible evidence that Rebecca couldn't deny or dismiss. Second, quietly restructure my business assets to protect Chen Architects from any claims she might make during divorce proceedings. Third, maintain absolute normalcy at home so she wouldn't become suspicious and destroy evidence or accelerate her timeline. And fourth, document every financial expenditure related to her affair to establish a pattern of marital asset misuse that would impact the final settlement. The goal, Laura emphasized, is to ensure that when she finally reveals her unhappiness and requests a divorce, you're holding all the cards and she's facing consequences she never anticipated. Within 48 hours, I was sitting across from Amanda Richardson, a former police detective turned private investigator whose office above a Korean restaurant in Capitol Hill looked like something from a noir film, but whose reputation for thoroughness and discretion made her worth the $300 hourly rate that would soon become a regular expense in my quest for unassailable evidence. Amanda listened to my story with the detached professionalism of someone who'd seen every variation of human betrayal, then laid out a surveillance plan that would have impressed military strategists. GPS tracking device legally installed on Rebecca's car since it was registered in both our names. Professional photography of her meetings with David using telephoto lenses and timestamp technology. Comprehensive financial auditing to trace every penny she'd spent on the affair. And most importantly, recorded conversations that would capture her lies in real time. Creating an audio record of deception that no opposing attorney could explain away. Your wife's been sloppy because she's overconfident, Amanda explained as I wrote her a retainer check that represented more money than most people spent on cars. But we need irrefutable documentation that shows pattern, premeditation, and financial abuse of marital assets, the holy trinity of divorce court evidence. The GPS tracker arrived via Amazon 2 days later, a device smaller than a matchbox that I installed under Rebecca's Lexus during her morning shower, my hands steady despite the surreal nature of what I was doing, transforming myself from trusting husband into detective investigating the woman I'd promised to love and cherish. That evening, when Rebecca announced another late meeting with her practiced regret and apologetic kiss, I watched her location on my phone app as she drove not to her office, but to the Fairmont Olympic Hotel downtown, where she spent 3 hours in what Amanda's background check had confirmed was David's regular room. The GPS coordinates providing irrefutable proof that her client emergency was actually another betrayal funded with our joint credit card. Over the next 2 weeks, Amanda's team compiled evidence that was devastating in its thoroughness. Photographs of Rebecca and David entering hotels separately but leaving together, intimate dinners at restaurants across the city, passionate embraces in parking garages, and most damning, Rebecca wearing the diamond earrings I'd given her for our 10th anniversary during what was clearly an afternoon rendezvous. The symbolism so perfect it felt deliberately calculated to maximize eventual pain. The financial forensics revealed the true scope of her deception. Over $8,000 in hotel charges, restaurant bills, and gifts for David, all paid from accounts I'd never monitored, money that represented not just theft but the use of our shared resources to fund her affair, making me an unwilling participant in my own betrayal. Meanwhile, Laura's corporate attorney helped me quietly restructure Chen Architects' ownership documents, formalizing governance structures that would make it impossible for any future ex-spouse to claim direct business ownership rather than financial settlement, changes that appeared to be standard business growth practices, but actually created an impenetrable legal barrier around my life's work. The emotional breaking point came during a Saturday morning when Jake and I were building Legos at the dining table, and he asked with devastating innocence, "Dad, are you and Mom mad at each other?" She told me sometimes grown-ups stop loving each other but still love their kids, and I don't want you to stop living here. The phrase, "stop loving each other but still love their kids," was lifted directly from Rebecca's messages with David, part of her script for explaining the divorce she was planning. And hearing it echoed in my son's small voice ignited a different kind of fury than the affair itself had sparked. She wasn't just destroying our marriage. She was already rehearsing the narrative. The perfect stage for Rebecca's destruction presented itself at her company's annual holiday gala, a black tie affair held in the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons, where Seattle's tech elite gathered to celebrate another year of innovation and success. And as I adjusted my cufflinks in the hotel's marble-appointed men's room, I realized that the woman who had so casually dismissed my concerns with "he's just a coworker" was about to discover that her coworker had become the instrument of her complete professional and personal annihilation. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. For weeks, I had played the disinterested husband, making excuses about my demanding project schedule, feigning indifference to her corporate events. All while Amanda's team finalized the devastating dossier that now resided on a discreet USB drive in my jacket pocket. And Laura's legal team prepared divorce papers that would be filed the morning after this evening's revelations transformed Rebecca from rising executive to cautionary tale. My attendance was unexpected. Rebecca had stopped inviting me months ago, claiming these events were networking opportunities where spouses would be distracting. But when I called her assistant directly and mentioned wanting to surprise my wife at her company's biggest event of the year, the invitation was arranged within hours, everyone eager to accommodate the successful architect who rarely attended social functions. I arrived precisely at 7:30, after cocktails had loosened tongues and before dinner would make departure difficult, wearing a custom-tailored navy suit that projected quiet confidence. Carrying myself with the bearing of a man who held all the cards and was finally ready to play them, my eyes immediately finding Rebecca across the crystalline-lit ballroom. Radiant in a midnight blue gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, laughing with a cluster of colleagues while David stood at her elbow. His hand resting possessively on her lower back in a gesture I had documented dozens of times through Amanda's telephoto lens. The ballroom buzzed with the energy of corporate success. Crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across polished marble floors, ice sculptures melting slowly beside champagne fountains, the city's business elite circulating in their natural habitat, discussing market trends and expansion plans while their spouses smiled and made appropriate small talk, none of them aware they were about to witness the most spectacular professional downfall in Seattle's recent memory. I spent the first hour circulating strategically, greeting familiar faces from previous events, discussing my latest architectural projects with practiced ease, projecting an image of calm professionalism while observing Rebecca and David, noting their interactions, the comfortable intimacy that had once been reserved for me, the way she touched his arm when making points, how he leaned in to whisper comments that made her laugh with genuine delight, their performance flawless except for the small moments when they thought no one was watching. My moment came during the brief lull after the CEO's quarterly address, when attention was centralized but conversation hadn't yet resumed, and I approached the AV station where the evening's presentation equipment waited. Introducing myself to the technical staff as Rebecca's husband, who had prepared a surprise tribute video for her recent promotion. My architect's credentials and confident demeanor earning their immediate cooperation in connecting my USB drive to the main display system. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the ballroom as conversations died and heads turned, "if I could have your attention for just a moment, I have something special to share about collaboration, dedication, and teamwork, qualities that have made this company so successful and that my wife Rebecca has exemplified in her recent partnerships." Rebecca's champagne flute stopped halfway to her lips, her eyes widening as she realized what was happening, but she was trapped by social convention and physical distance, unable to stop what was about to unfold without creating an even bigger scene, her face already beginning to drain of color as I clicked the remote and the room's massive screens flickered to life. The presentation began with a title slide. "Professional Collaboration, a Case Study in Dedication," followed immediately by a timestamped photograph of Rebecca and David entering the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, their profiles unmistakable despite the discreet angle, the date and time clearly visible in the corner, establishing the first piece of irrefutable evidence that would systematically destroy every lie she'd told. The images continued in methodical sequence. Rebecca and David leaving the hotel 3 hours later, sharing an intimate dinner at an upscale restaurant while I ate alone at home, passionate embraces in parking garages, her wearing the diamond bracelet I'd given her for our anniversary during what was clearly an afternoon rendezvous, each photograph building an undeniable narrative of systematic betrayal conducted with corporate precision. Then came the text messages, blown up to fill the massive screens, Rebecca's own words condemning her more effectively than any accusation I could have made. "He's so predictable, doesn't suspect anything, and the sex with David is incredible. I forgot what passion felt like. And after Christmas I'll ask for the divorce, take half his assets, and start fresh with someone who actually excites me." Her casual cruelty displayed in high-definition clarity for everyone whose opinion she valued. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. 300 people frozen in horrified fascination as I systematically destroyed Rebecca's reputation with her own evidence. Watching colleagues who respected her professionalism realize they'd been witnessing an elaborate deception. That the woman they'd trusted with million-dollar campaigns had been conducting a months-long affair, using company events and resources as cover for her betrayal. David tried to slip away, his face flushed red with panic, but I had positioned myself strategically near the room's main exit, and my voice stopped him cold. David, please don't leave. This next part specifically showcases your collaborative efforts. As the screen shifted to financial records showing $8,000 in hotel charges and romantic dinners, all paid from joint accounts while I unknowingly funded their affair. The audio evidence was the most devastating. Rebecca's voice crystal clear through the ballroom sound system, recorded during one of her late-night strategy calls, describing in explicit detail what she wanted to do to David in the hotel room I was paying for. Her words echoing through the elegant space while her CEO sat at the head table, her expression hardening with each passing second as she processed the complete destruction of Rebecca's professional credibility. Rebecca finally broke, a choked sob escaping her lips as she tried to speak, but no words came, just broken sounds that conveyed the magnitude of her shock, while David remained frozen in place. His promotion celebration transformed into public humiliation that would follow him through Seattle's interconnected business community for years to come, both of them trapped in the spotlight of their own making. The presentation concluded with a final compilation. Security camera footage from various hotels, restaurant receipts for romantic dinners during claimed work emergencies, and a recording of Rebecca describing me as financially useful but emotionally dead, while discussing their post-divorce plans with the casual cruelty of someone who'd already written me out of her life story. The evidence so comprehensive that no explanation or denial could possibly suffice. I clicked off the presentation and looked directly at Rebecca, who had collapsed into her chair, her midnight blue gown now seeming to weigh her down, her carefully styled hair disheveled as she instinctively tried to hide her face from the hundreds of horrified, judging eyes now fixed solely on her. Her transformation from confident executive to broken woman complete in less than 10 minutes. The most remarkable thing about true collaboration, I said into the deathly quiet ballroom, my voice calm and professional, is how it reveals character, both the character of those who honor their commitments and those who betray them while using company resources to fund their deception. The CEO stood slowly, her movement commanding attention, her voice cutting through the silence with executive authority. Ms. Chen, Mr. Collins, I believe we need to have an immediate conversation about professional conduct, company policy violations, and the future of your employment with this organization. Her tone making it clear that their careers had just ended as publicly and definitively as their affair had been exposed. I walked toward the exit with the same measured pace I'd used entering, leaving behind a woman whose carefully constructed life had just collapsed in front of everyone whose opinion she valued, knowing that by morning, every detail of her betrayal would be circulating through Seattle's professional networks, ensuring that her calculated deception would cost her far more than just our marriage. It would cost her the career she'd sacrificed everything to build, the reputation she'd spent years cultivating, and the respect of every person who'd ever trusted her with their confidence or their business. The silence that followed my departure from the Four Seasons wasn't empty, it was full of potential, pregnant with the systematic consequences I'd spent months preparing. And as I drove through Seattle's rain-slicked streets toward the hotel room I'd reserved days earlier, I felt the profound shift from the naive husband who'd believed he's just a coworker to the architect of Rebecca's complete professional and personal destruction, knowing that by morning the legal machinery would be in motion. The divorce papers filed, and her carefully constructed life would begin its methodical collapse. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. I didn't go home that night because home was still contaminated with 12 years of lies, still heavy with the ghost of trust I'd never be able to resurrect. So instead I checked into the Marriott downtown, a neutral space where I could process what I'd just accomplished without the emotional weight of our shared bedroom, our family photos, the kitchen table where she'd looked me in the eye and dismissed my growing suspicions with such practiced ease that I'd almost believed her performance. Laura's text arrived at 11:30. Emergency orders filed and approved, accounts frozen, temporary custody granted, she can't touch business assets or relocate Jake, you're protected on all fronts. And I felt the deep satisfaction of a project completed exactly according to specifications, every contingency planned. Every structural weakness in Rebecca's position, exploited with the precision I'd learned from decades of turning architectural visions into concrete reality. The next morning brought Rebecca's predictable desperation, 17 missed calls, 12 voicemails that progressed from shocked anger to sobbing pleas, each one revealing her complete failure to understand that this wasn't an emotional reaction, but a calculated response to months of systematic betrayal. That the man who'd trusted her completely had been replaced by someone who documented everything, planned every move, and executed justice with the cold efficiency of a controlled demolition. When I finally returned home that afternoon, I found her in our kitchen, still wearing the wrinkled remains of her midnight blue gown, surrounded by empty wine bottles and tear-stained tissues, her phone buzzing constantly with calls from former colleagues who'd witnessed her public destruction. And when she looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes and asked, "How could you do that to me?" I simply placed the divorce papers on the counter and said, "You did that to yourself, I just made sure everyone could see it." The legal proceedings unfolded with ruthless efficiency because Amanda's evidence was unassailable and Laura's strategy was flawless, resulting in a settlement that awarded me primary custody of Jake, our Bellevue home, and 70% of our marital assets, while Rebecca received just enough to start over but nowhere near the comfortable divorce she'd planned. Her attorney advising immediate acceptance rather than prolonged litigation that would only increase her public humiliation and legal costs. Rebecca's termination from the software company was announced via company-wide email within 48 hours, citing violations of professional conduct and misuse of corporate resources, while David received identical treatment. Their careers in Seattle's interconnected tech community effectively ended by the viral footage that had already spread across LinkedIn and every professional network, where their former colleagues discussed the spectacular downfall they'd witnessed firsthand. The social consequences were equally devastating as Rebecca became an instant pariah, ostracized by the very people whose approval she desperately sought, dinner invitations evaporating, friendships dissolving. The exclusive circles she'd worked so hard to penetrate now actively avoiding her, unable to overlook the public humiliation and sheer audacity of her betrayal, leaving her isolated in a city where reputation mattered more than talent. Jake, with the resilience that children somehow possess, adapted to our new reality better than I'd dared hope, asking few questions but seeming to understand instinctively that Mommy's choices had created permanent changes. And I dedicated every spare moment to rebuilding our bond, taking him hiking in the Cascades, helping with science projects, attending every soccer game, ensuring that amidst his mother's downfall he felt secure and cherished, knowing that protecting his emotional well-being was the ultimate victory. 6 months later, Chen Architects had expanded into commercial development, my reputation for integrity and precision attracting clients who valued working with someone whose personal character matched their professional standards. And I realized that Rebecca's betrayal, devastating as it had been, had ultimately freed me from a relationship that had become performance rather than partnership, allowing me to focus on building something genuine with people who actually valued loyalty and trust. The most unexpected development came when I met Elena Rodriguez, a landscape architect whose work on sustainable urban design had caught my attention during a professional conference, leading to collaborations that evolved into friendship, then romance built on shared values and genuine compatibility rather than the desperate passion that had driven Rebecca to destroy everything stable in her life. And when Elena met Jake, their easy rapport convinced me that some people enter your life not to complete you, but to help you become who you were meant to be. One evening, 18 months after the divorce, Rebecca called asking to meet for coffee, and I found her at a downtown cafe looking older, worn down by consequences, her designer wardrobe replaced by off-the-rack clothes that suggested her new financial reality, and she apologized with what seemed like genuine remorse, acknowledging that her pursuit of excitement had cost her everything that actually mattered. Her family, her career, her reputation, and most importantly, Jake's daily presence, admitting that the passionate affair she'd sacrificed everything for had ended within 2 months of the gala, David proving just as selfish when their relationship was no longer forbidden and exciting. "I know you'll never forgive me," she said, hands trembling as she stirred her coffee, "but I need you to know that I understand now what I threw away, not just the marriage but the partnership, the life we'd built. The trust that took years to develop and seconds to destroy." And I listened without interrupting, recognizing that her words were meant more for her own healing than my forgiveness. And when she finished, I told her the truth. That I didn't hate her anymore, that anger had been replaced by indifference, that she was simply someone I'd once loved who'd chosen to become a stranger. 2 years after that devastating December evening, I stood in my home office watching Jake help Alina plan a garden that would bloom for decades if properly tended. And I realized that Rebecca's betrayal had taught me the difference between love and infatuation, between partnership and performance, between building something lasting and chasing something thrilling that ultimately destroys everything it touches. And as I watched my son laugh with the woman who'd become his bonus mom, I knew that